All right. Hello, 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 and welcome all. How's it going? Our lovely panelists and our attendee members that are coming in. I see the numbers are growing. That's great. We're so excited to have you here today. And since it's 4 o'clock, I'm going to go ahead and get started and just, create a little introductory space for us before our panelists introduce themselves for this session. So today we're going to be talking about what it's like to have a disability abroad, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so just in short, in terms of the visibility of people with disabilities in international exchange programs and the resources for accessibility are not only important for engaging future students and scholars with disabilities, but it really allows prospective folks to feel like that they can be accommodated appropriately if and when they decide to pursue these academic scholarships. So during this session, we have three lovely panelists who will be sharing how they navigated their disabilities day to day throughout their U.S. international exchange programs. And so I'm going to call on each of the panelists here today to introduce themselves, their pronouns, the program they participated in, and a little bit of what they're doing. And so, Sophia, why don't you kick us off?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia. I am from California. I did a Fulbright in Vietnam in 2018 to 2019 as an ETA, and I also did a Boren Fellowship in China for 2019-2020 year. Right now, I currently work in Arlington, Virginia at CRDF Global. It's a nonprofit focused on nonproliferation, which I'm really excited about. And I'm excited to meet you all or speak with you.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Okay, how about Jasmine next?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine Whaley. My pronouns are she and her. I'm coming from lovely Greensboro, North Carolina today. We have an amazing fall spring going on, so it's a beautiful day. And I am a community organizer. I currently work in grassroots politics, and I studied with the Gilman Scholarship, and that was in 2012.
And last but not least, Katey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katey Redmond. I am talking to you from my hometown, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I did two exchange programs. I was under ISEP, which is International Student Exchange Programs, a network of over 300 universities throughout 50 countries that host exchange programs. And I did that at the University of Botswana in Botswana. So I was in Gaborone till from January to May of 2013. And then most recently, I was a Fulbright research student in Namibia looking at community perceptions of tuberculosis in rural areas. I was pulled right when, and that was from September 2019 to March 2020, because I was evacuated during the COVID pandemic. Fingers crossed, I am a semi-finalist to go back and finish my research in Namibia, but we will see what happens with the pandemic and everything else, but it's truly a pleasure to be here.
Sophia, Jasmine, and Katey, thank you all so much for being here with us today. And to our audience members, we have the chat function open and available if you have questions throughout our session today. So please don't be afraid or don't be shy to ask any of our lovely panelists some questions as you hear them speak about their experience. So, all right, we can get started. I'm really pumped. We all had the chance to meet over the last couple of days and to get to know each other. And I'm so thrilled to have all of them share their experiences because there's a lot to learn. And before we get into it, I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Nina Angelis. I'm a moderator for today. I'm also an alumna of the Fulbright program. I did my research in Jordan in 2016 and 2017. And I'm really excited to be here with our panelists and with you all today. So to get us started, in terms of our panelists, could you just let us know and share with the audience what it was like being a person with a disability abroad, and feel free to share as much information about your specific disability, your experience. Yeah, feel free to share your story here with us.
I can go first. I can get this started. So I have type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed in 2006. I was in 6th grade, so I've had it for over 15 years now. I have lived with it all my life, basically for all my life. And I never really thought I can go abroad or do all these things. It wasn't until college where I realized, there are opportunities for me to do this. That being said, I did have to do my own research on how to, get my medicine, how to maintain everything abroad. So there was a lot of pre-planning and also during when I was in my Fulbright and my Boren. That includes insurance, medications, getting approval from doctors, all these different, I had to think of all the possibilities of what could happen to me in order to prepare while I was there. Yeah, so that's my disability.
Yes, so I have bipolar type 2 disorder, and I wasn't diagnosed until 2018. I studied abroad in Amman in Jordan in 2012. So I wasn't diagnosed until years later in grad school when I studied in Berlin, Germany. And so speaking while I was in Jordan, my true mental health struggle came at the end of my program and once I transitioned back into the States. So I actually had I've always struggled with anxiety and depression, but I had quite a nice time while I was in Jordan. Yeah, it was quite lovely. I really enjoyed it.
And so my qualification for being on this panel is I was diagnosed with a form of autism at the age of 5. So I live with a disability, and similar to Jasmine, I've struggled with a generalized anxiety disorder for basically my entire life. And what was really insightful for me, just to start this conversation, is how disability is culturally defined. So studying abroad in Botswana and taking psychopathology, which is a normal psychology, I realized that how, for better or worse, America had a huge say in how things were framed with disability, like how we were teaching other students and other medical students and other professionals. But interestingly, I have felt that having a disability has been some of my best occupational therapy working abroad. In terms of problem solving, learning how to navigate things, think quickly on my feet. And I feel a lot more empowered when I am abroad versus the United States. Actually, my toughest times of being abroad had more to do with the American stigma and American institutions and people having their own internal biases and working with Americans. My exchange program was extremely positive and motivated me to keep going abroad and studying abroad. But I think that was that's been the big thing. But when I am abroad, I'm treated just as a professional. I'm from a different country. I don't have to know when to laugh at the joke or when to make eye contact. We'll give one tiny quick story. This is from my Peace Corps service in South Africa. Growing up, people have told me you have to make eye contact. Like I had so many therapists emphasize eye contact. And when you're abroad, especially as a woman, there's some cultures where that actually keeps you out of trouble. And so I was really shocked when my host family's pastor complimented me and said, "You move like an African," because I was curtsying the traditional way and averting eye contact, because that's just how my brain works. And then it was really moving to have my teacher, they called them a language and cross-cultural facilitator in Peace Corps, tell me that I behave very well, what is like the name, you carry yourself very well. And having my behavior critiqued since I was a young girl, that was just so moving 3 months into South Africa and in Peace Corps, which was a challenging experience, but it was just like, I wasn't this disabled person, so.
It is fascinating to hear about how in different countries, the term disability is even defined or translated into. So Sophia and Jasmine, I'm curious, do you have similar stories like Katey's where, in terms of interacting with your host countries, were there, kind of more distinct experiences around your time in Vietnam or in Jordan and having diabetes or having bipolar disorder? And what was that like? In terms of kind of the engagement from your host countries?
I'm going to give a really, really big shout out to CIEE, which was the study abroad program that I went with, because we had an amazing nurse in our program. And I mean, I love Arabs. I loved Jordan and Karima. And this was around general anxiety. It's never something we talked about when I was a kid. I did not know what it was. I'm first generation college student. So all of this was very, very new to me. And Karima really just, I didn't know it was anxiety at the time, but she really sat there and she helped me kind of compartmentalize it. And I mean, the first time I met her, we had a 3-hour tea at a coffee shop. And she actually invited me to help to lead a trip to Palestine, to the West Bank. Yeah, right. So I had an incredible experience with the professionals at CIEE. I think I received really, really good care. And they were very understanding. And I think also to this cultural bit, it is very, very cultural for it's a slower pace and it's a much more communal type of feeling in Amman. And so the idea of me being like, hey, I'm having these problems. I just want to, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to come and Karim being like, no, let's get a coffee, let's get a tea, let's get another tea. Really wonderful. And she sat down and she spent the time. So I feel like I benefited from that. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's lovely to hear. Having diabetes in Vietnam and in China, where it's heavily rice and noodles, could really mess up your blood sugar, especially with the long-term carbs. But I've always been, carb counting since I was in 6th grade. So I knew how much I could eat. And then they've always asked me, like, I just let it be known, like, what it is, because I have an insulin pump. So people usually are the first to ask me what it is. They're like, oh, is that an MP3 player? I'm like, no, it's an insulin pump. So I show them like how many carbs I eat and I put it in and the insulin. And they've always, like, my host family in Vietnam was always really good about, like, asking me how I'm doing, if the food was enough, or if I can eat this, or if I can eat that. So that was always welcoming. But there was always problems, like, with my insulin and my supplies and being abroad. Of like, okay, it's not just, I have so many things I have to bring more with me, right? It's not just my clothes. I have to bring all my supplies. I have to bring all my pills. I have to bring all my medicine. It has to be refrigerated. And then going through security at the airport, it's also like a whole deal of like, no, I promise you can wipe my hands down to the bomb check to make sure to go through for my insulin pump. But yeah, and what Jasmine said too, when I was abroad too, it was my first time experiencing anxiety and depression. But Fulbright has a wonderful thing called Fulbright Assist, where you can reach out to counseling and get once a week counseling. And I definitely use that all the time. And I think I know Katey did too. But yeah, there's a lot of support. You may not know of it, but it'll definitely become known over the time and more you speak to your Fulbright person.
Yeah, and I'll just keep it 100 with going off of what Sophia said. I actually had a mental breakdown in Namibia that was very unexpected. Just having to set up my house by myself, banking by myself. Previously, when I did this, it was all through a university, or Peace Corps did this for me. And it all worked out. It was a really good learning experience, but it just exhausted me. And then I had to go on antidepressants. And I was so scared because of previous experiences I had where other American institutions, unnamed, wanted to have me leave the country because they thought I wasn't coping well because I was autistic. And I want to be clear here that if people can't handle things, or if it's not the right time, it is absolutely okay if they need to leave the country. It's just not what I wanted. And I knew that I could handle it. And I'm just so fortunate that it took me 3 weeks to try and figure out, do I tell Fulbright? And I'm so glad that I did, because the Namibian Fulbright providers, I met so many people in Namibia that also struggle with mental health. Like, it's actually, and I think this is something we don't talk about a lot in the United States, is the people that we work with are human. The same health issues. There are people with diabetes, maybe not as many in Vietnam and China. There are people with bipolar disorder in Germany and in Southern Africa. There are people with autism in all these countries. They have brains. And I think there's kind of like this myth of people are just naturally tough. And yes, the environments are challenging, just by geography and climate, especially in Southern Africa. But I wish that someone told me that sooner. And yes, the Fulbright counseling was fantastic. It also helped me get through an evacuation with the pandemic. And that was just truly, truly grateful. And it turned out to be the best therapist I ever had, because her son was on the autism spectrum and I didn't have to do autism one-on-one. But even if I didn't have that, getting the help that I needed so the situation didn't become a life-threatening situation was absolutely worth it. So
Katey, if I can actually call on you again, because I'm curious, yes, to just hear more, especially I think you draw on a really important point around, when we, again, think about other countries and, the people that you're working with on these programs, similarly, it's like, mental health is not exclusive to just the United States. Bipolar disorder, diabetes, all of these different health and diagnoses, they're not just exclusive to one place. So I'm curious more also about some other surprises and challenges that you found in tandem with that, because that seemed like an interesting surprise or observation, I guess, so to say, in terms of how you found just, how different countries engaged in these spaces and with these different experiences.
Definitely. So I'll try and expand and you can tell me if I'm hitting the mark here. I will say I do benefit from white privilege. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that, especially in Southern Africa. And so I do have Thriving Gale. I have Thriving Gale in the United States a little bit. I try to channel that into like talking and advocating, getting more people to the front. But the bottom line is there's so many people that did not get the resources that I had at the same time in the same period. And it's both been really powering and also really challenging to be somebody with autism and talk to these communities and say, look, I am somebody with this diagnosis we're learning about in the textbook, but it doesn't have to be this limiting story. When I was in Botswana, I met somebody whose sister had cerebral palsy, and one of my life mentors, who was a child life director at my local hospital in Albuquerque, had cerebral palsy. And that woman was from New York. Shout out to anybody from NYC, but like she could whip me into shape. Like when I said things that were insensitive to families facing really critical hospitalizations, she would go out in her walker and pull me out to the side as a 16-year-old and tell me what was what. Like you learned not to underestimate her. But it was something telling this man the story, and just like, his sister was at the point where it would be so hard for her to get those services and those experiences, but just planting those seeds and saying, what sets me apart is that I got the resources. I'm not some special person, like, I want to get to a world. And again, there's a lot of structural barriers. I realize there's miles to go before we sleep. But it also just is good for me to just be like, yes, you can study abroad. I am somebody that's there, and this doesn't have to be, the defining story. Because I think, again, United States does not have a great representation of people with mental health, people with disabilities, people with other health needs. We're too fragile to study abroad. But just even having them see us and have these conversations when we've been abroad has been just such a huge experience. And I'm hoping that kind of ignites it for not just more Americans to study abroad, but also their own countries. Because I want people to have the same occupational therapy that I have. It's been life-changing and beneficial. So I'm not sure if that hits the question, but that's what I've got. Let me know if I can expand.
It does. It does. Thank you, Katey. And as someone, and I don't know if I mentioned this to our audience members, but I mentioned to the panelists when we first met, I'm interested in this topic in particular because I grew up one of 5 siblings myself, with 2 of my brothers both having learning disabilities. My youngest is on the autism spectrum, and then my oldest brother had a stroke when he was still a baby. And so it affected the part of his brain where his speech and language comprehension was a little bit impacted. So I'm always curious to learn about these, especially for them as they, are excited to travel themselves. But if you could go back to our panelists, Sophia and Jasmine, I'm curious too, if you could share with us what are some surprises or challenges you had while you were abroad as well that you could share with our audience members. And then I'd love to ask another question before we go into a different part of our question set, more so around resources and more technical aspects of what it's like to have a disability abroad.
Yeah, I can share one of the challenges I faced. I thought I prepared for everything, having my little exit plans about something happening to my insulin, something happening to my pump. But then 2 things happened where I was like, well, okay, I had to reevaluate. I had to be very flexible. So I was an ETA at a university, and at that university, I lived on campus, and the power went out. And I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, there goes my fridge. So my insulin is not being, cold. And I was like, okay, well, I can drive somewhere on my electric bike. And I was like, wait, I need electricity for my electric bike. And I was like, okay, well, I need to get food. And I was like, I can't cook because my hot plate isn't working. And I was like, maybe I can go get food, but then I don't have cash. So I had to go to an ATM, but I don't have any, couldn't go to the ATM because of my electric bike. So I had all these little things piling up. I was like, well, wow, I never really expected this. So what I did, I just reached out to my host family. I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, can you help me? Basically, I didn't have any way of asking for help. I just said, can you just help me? And she offered for me to stay at her home for a week where I kept my insulin there. So that was really helpful. There's always people there in your life, wherever you study abroad, that are willing to help. That's what I found out. And then another incident was getting into a motorcycle accident. Not extreme, but just very minimal, where I just started skidding and then my insulin pump, the back of the clip fell off. So I had nowhere to keep my insulin pump. It was just tied to my stomach. And so I just had to hold it all the time. So I would put it in my pocket, and I had like a makeshift clip that I used, like a hair clip that I glued on. And so there's definitely a lot of challenges that you can't be prepared for. I guess the moral of the story is just there's always a solution, and not to always freak out in that moment. I mean, it's okay to freak out, but there's always help there for you no matter what, whether it be your Fulbright program or whatever language program you're going through, or just in general, your institution, your university. So those are my challenges that I experienced, but I'm here now, so you know that it's okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like, I think there's that saying around necessity is the mother of invention. Like, you clearly were very resourceful in finding your solution. So, and yes, we are happy that you're still here with us. So.
Yes. So I two things. I want to echo Sophia's point of there will be people around who are willing to help. And at the same time, I want to talk about, to this point, my host family was Palestinian. And I went to Jordan again the spring semester of 2012, and Trayvon Martin died February 2012. And so one of the first conversations I had with my host family was about racial dynamics in the United States. And because there's a very long history of like pro-Black activism and with Palestinian rights in the United States. So when I tell you, we spent breakfast and lunch talking about this. And when Trayvon died, they were actually really, really helpful. Like, they were so helpful in helping me kind of put my head back together and kind of helping me keep my head above water. But then another thing that I was very, very surprised at, and this is going to be my privilege coming out, I was incredibly surprised at the quality of care while I was there. And it also brought up some really, really uncomfortable things around class for me. Because I mean, I had really good medical care when I was in Jordan, and I was telling the rest of the panel, it was better medical care than I've received in the United States, the hands down. My best friend also had a similar experience where she was fast tracked in front of people for the flu or for a stomach virus ahead of refugees who were fleeing a war. So there are a lot of different interesting dynamics. So it was really, really good for me, but it is one of those interesting, important things about studying abroad. And like Sophia and Katey were saying, really trying to learn and contextualize your experience in the things that you're bringing with you in that space.
Yeah, and I just also want to reinforce that during my mental breakdown in Namibia, that I had a list from the embassy, like they introduced you to the embassy, which was moving on up. Didn't even get an introduction to the embassy when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. So I had a list of numbers, and I just called the first number on the list when things started to arise. And I think I also struggled a lot with imposter syndrome and classism and elitism as well, because I try to be humble. I sure as heck don't know all the answers. But because I was American, because I was autistic, because I had the issue that was presenting and I knew how to advocate, I was moved up to the top of the list to get access to antidepressants, where that could have been a 3-month waiting list. And that's what the case was for Namibians. So it was classism, absolutely, and we need to do better. But I'm hoping by taking that experience and saying that and sharing this, like Sophia said, we're all here, we're all healthy. and you just problem solve. I can officially call myself an explicitive, insert the words, because I had to navigate mental health care by myself, not telling anybody 9,000 miles away from home. And it wasn't fun. I should have reached out to Fulbright sooner, but I did it. And a lot of other people can if you have that perseverance and that stuff. So using your resources, talking to the local embassy, talking to your local Fulbright office or the study abroad offices. That is why we have a program, right? That there are supports in place. And even, being cautious, it depends on how stigma is, but reaching out to your local universities. I've been really fortunate to have good experiences with that and those providers as well. So
it's also worth noting that the programs are generally used to American students as well. And so people will understand. And if they don't understand, then they will be able to approach the local system much better than you will. And I don't know about you all, but Jordanians are just like, don't worry about this. I got it. We don't need for you to do anything. You go sit over there with your terrible Arabic and we'll figure it out.
Sorry, go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah, so you should be fine. Yeah, it feels like a very safe and comfortable environment. At least it did for me.
And just one last point that I learned through going through therapy with Fulbright, it is very common. And actually Fulbright, and I wish somebody told me this at my pre-departure orientation, where I had a really tough time with microaggressions relating to disability at a diversity panel, which set the imposter syndrome in. They're actually seeing statistics that show providing therapy enables people to use their Fulbright. So going out and reaching for therapy if you need it, however the concern is, like, more people have been able to finish their Fulbrights with that support. And so they're getting the memo, they're promoting Fulbright Assist. And so, because I don't know, working in global health, you're always kind of worried about like resources and constraints, but we know that this is something that is beneficial in keeping people healthy and having fulfilling Fulbright services. So just want to dispel that stigma that I accidentally internalized incorrectly.
Well, I think the direction of the conversation is heading toward this, kind of more resource focused part of our session, where I was just curious to hear more about, and I think our audience members would be really curious to hear more too about how, and it sounds like Fulbright Assist was it seems we're putting a very big emphasis on this as a big resource, which, as someone that was a Fulbright alumna, I don't know if I actually remember hearing about it, but I'm glad that it does exist and that it, is available to Fulbrighters. But I'm curious too, like, how else did your programs provide accessibility for you while you were abroad? And in particular, there was another question I wanted to make sure that we asked in terms of, were you connected with other students or people from your host countries with disabilities? And what was that like? I mean, especially because we've been talking about, this different kind of interpretation or definition of disability all across the world. So yeah, please feel free to share.
I can go. So I remember in Vietnam, we had a 1-month orientation in Hanoi where all of us, our whole cohort stayed together. And we were given all these resources that were close to us. So I was in northern Vietnam, right on the border with China in Lao Cai, next to Sapa, in case anyone has been there before. So we were given like a list of like all these dentist places, dentist office, and if any like concerns with any part of your body, if anything was wrong, this is the doctor office you should go to or contact. And it lets you know if they spoke English or Vietnamese. And it was mostly like European offices that were there, not necessarily American. But they will provide, some form of resource for you. I didn't have anyone that I was connected to with diabetes when I was there. They knew about it, but it wasn't very common. So I don't have a personal story on that note.
So I can say after I was diagnosed or while I was in grad school, I was in Berlin, Germany, and you have to know how to ask for the help. And then once you understand how to ask for the help, And the timeline is also super important. So as much pre-warning as you can give people around essentially an ADA request. That's what I did, an Americans with Disability Act request, where it literally has in it like, these are my symptoms. This is like, I need to work sometimes in a space that's completely removed from other people. I can't work with sound around me. That happens sometimes when I'm manic. And it's perfectly fine, but I needed to be able to communicate that with my professors. And if you don't feel comfortable talking to your professors, then go to the disability office, go to student affairs, go to whoever handles that. And they were actually very, very instrumental on getting me like deadlines being pushed back on short notice. That was really, really important. And that is actually why I finished my degree, to Katey's point. Like I was able to put the structures in place as soon as I got there at the beginning of the semester, like a month before finals, right? Like these types of things, don't wait till the end. And I was definitely able to get the help that I wanted. I have met other bipolar folks, and it's really hit or miss. It's invisible illness. And so it's just, if I don't say that I have bipolar disorder, then no one knows. So yeah, my general personality is very up and upbeat. So people tend to not know unless I'm depressed. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to declare another aspect of my bias, I studied abroad when I almost had 2 decades of experience and living away from home in college with this diagnosis of autism and how that looks. And I was involved with advocacy efforts at my college. I can't speak to the experience, but I know a lot of women on the autism spectrum in particular don't get diagnosed until their 20s and their 30s. And I am grateful that I at least had some awareness. Like, I'm in my late 20s. I still don't know what autism means in the world. So I'm very doubtful of anybody that calls themselves an expert on anything, even if you have a PhD in it. But to go to my point, I at least knew how to carry myself and to be aware of those things. And one of my successes in life has always just been growing up in New Mexico, where there weren't any autism programs in the late 90s. I had to be cognizant and always aware of others with disabilities. We have so much limited resources. So I'm going to ask for what I absolutely need. And also be aware of that I'm not the only one that's going to be pushing the international programs office. Like, I'm going to do the best that I can to solve my problems and do that front. And so in terms of accommodations, because you just don't know, when you have a behavioral cognitive need, you don't know what's going to come up. And so I felt better. I benefit from counseling for most of my life, just knowing would there be counseling. And so real quick, the story of how I got to Botswana was I was looking at I worked on water and sanitation projects in Ecuador, in Nicaragua, through my college, and I realized I absolutely loved it. I had the opportunity to work abroad, and then I had to go to my international programs coordinator. I was initially going to go to Växjö, Sweden, because it is just kind of a commonality that people with disabilities, and that, there is some truth to this. If you have life-threatening medical conditions, there are some countries that can accommodate that and cannot. Not saying that as an excuse. We need to get more into health equity, but just where the world is at to keep you safe and healthy. So, but there's this push to push us into countries that have more of an American-like infrastructure. So I was going to go to Växjö, Sweden, and study health psych. And I realized that I needed to go off the beaten path. And so I looked on the ISEP website 5 times, and Botswana came up. And checking my bias and not being scared to go to Africa, I finally went to my international program coordinator, who didn't blink twice. I said, okay, I'm going to make your job more difficult. I want to go to Botswana. And she immediately went to the International Exchange ISEP's program office for the Africa office. They worked with Botswana. I was lucky enough to get an exchange, which was the only way I could have gone under that funding, which meant I paid directly to my institution, as opposed to paying as an international student to the University of Botswana for that semester. So that accommodation, and then the disabilities office was always aware of it. I knew how to access, like, for learning disabilities and things like that. Thankfully, Botswana was just such an inclusive, great experience. I did not have to access that, but they were aware of this stuff and they were aware of that information. And I feel better knowing that if I needed those services, I would know how to do that. I will say that in my case, we would have had to pay for counseling out of pocket. It wasn't like Fulbright with ISEP, and maybe that's changed because that was, oh my gosh, almost 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So just to be aware of that. And then to the second question, did I work with people when I was abroad? Like Jasmine said, it's kind of a hit or miss. I have a lot of autistic DAR. I can kind of suspect when people have certain behaviors, though I'm not going to stereotype things. But it was really cool, like me being open about having autism during psychopathology. I had a student that just diagnosed himself with a sleeping disorder. Like they're like, wait, I've had this issue for a really long time. And like people are starting to explore their mental health and their challenges. But I didn't have formal connections with autism. I'm still bummed. I missed the first autism walk in all of Botswana because nobody knew that I existed. But in Namibia, real quick, I did get connected. When I was recovering from my mental breakdown, community service has been like a really huge thing for me. Like it's how I engage with social skills. It's good practice. It makes things, gets me out of my anxiety mode and think about other people. And so I got connected to the Autism Society of Namibia, and we actually worked on making a play based on the book, The Reason I Jump. And when I got pulled, I was editing it remotely. And that actually was, that has been approved for the National Theatre of Namibia to be their national presentation to try and foster inclusion. And it's adapted in a Southern Namibian context, but that was just a really cool project. And then I also, just through volunteering to edit things and trying to build my connections, wound up being the final editor for Namibia's disability etiquette manual. And so you just never know how you get involved with these things and those perspectives. But that was just very serendipitous. I usually don't bring attention to being having a disability unless I really trust the people because of stigma. But I've also learned that's a really good teaching method when I'm comfortable doing so. But in the end, I have a job to do, and that's why I work abroad. And if autism has something to do with that and I have to declare my bias, fine. But if not, you know, it is what it is. So.
Yes, and I actually wanted to pick up on another point about medication. Finding the right combination of medicine for bipolar is so difficult. It's so hard, y'all. And so given that being abroad can be a very intense experience sometimes, right? Like like Sophie said, like I didn't have a place to put the medicine, and then I needed to go buy some, and then I didn't have cash because I didn't have. It's happened to all of us, and it's some of the hindsight. It's one of the better like experiences. But in Germany specifically, they have a bias against medication. Like Americans, we medicate way too heavily for them, and so. As an example, I needed to go get a dental dam. I had like a impacted tooth, and my German dentist gave me 600 milligrams of ibuprofen. It was just like, take this whenever you need it. I had to go home overnight for a funeral, and I got back and I got to Memphis, Tennessee, and I went to the emergency room. They gave me a shot of like painkillers. When I tell you, like the Germans do not really medicate. And so it was actually really, really difficult for me to like stand up for myself and to deny treatments, but then also to fight for them. Because when you're not diagnosed as bipolar and you are depressed, what ends up happening is that people want to prescribe you antidepressants, which can kick you into a manic episode. So that happened to me one time, and I've never taken antidepressants again. And I actually had to fight with some doctors and be like, no, I will not do that. And so I do want to put that out there. It can be a difficult time. And again, knowing what you need and knowing yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable advocating with someone, bring someone with you. Genuinely and truly. I started having to call one of my friends and be like, talk to, because I can't. So do what you have to do. I feel comfortable that y'all will figure it out. But I do want to put that out there.
Yeah, I want to comment on that too. It's like standing up for yourself and getting your medication. When you do leave, like prior to your departure, you know, you have to have, there's options of like getting 3-month supplies of your medication or a year supply. And my insurance would not let me do a year supply. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to come home every 3 months to get, you know, I'm going to be abroad for a year, for 2 years. I'm not going to come home every 3 months to get my medication, and then shipping to communist countries where they open and look through the medication and deem whether it's like, you know, appropriate. Definitely fight for yourself and like advocate and say like, no, this is what I need. There's no other way. And I will speak what Jasmine said, like definitely advocate for yourself because there's no one else that will. And then I also want to mention what Katey brought up. So most students do apply within their university to go to these programs. I didn't. I applied at large. So I didn't have a disability resource center like backing me up or helping me out. So I had to do a lot of this on my own. And if you do have any questions about it, please reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. You can see it on my bio. If you have any questions, like let me know because I will guide you because I don't want you to be lost in any way that I was. It was a lot to get through twice before going to Vietnam and before going to China. I thought I could, I solved the problems that I did with Vietnam when I was going to China, but no, same problem showed up, same insurance problems, same getting that. But going back to Jasmine, yes, definitely advocate for yourself. Yeah, definitely let me know if you need any help with that.
I just want to quickly comment, when we all met each other, something that I think Katey was the one that brought it up in terms of how much can be talked about this particular topic, because, there aren't too many venues for us to be sharing information and resources and knowledge like this. So I just want to say, I'm really grateful that you're all here to be doing that for our audience. We do have a few questions in the chat. So I do want to have us start maybe putting those into our live discussion, if that's okay with you. And feel free to all jump in as I read some of these off. So Alexa is asking of you three, what advice do you have for advisors, for those who do study abroad or national awards who want to encourage and support college students with disabilities who want to study abroad and apply for national awards? And Sophia, I would also say, like, please feel free to add into, given that you did it more through like an independent direction yourself. So maybe just advice in general could be really great for those who might have already graduated or are really interested in doing independent research.
Yeah, of course. Some advice I would just, I don't know what else to say besides like you have to do your research on your own, but there are resources online. Before applying to Fulbright, I looked up blogs to see if anyone has, studied abroad with a disability with diabetes. How did they take care of their insulin? How did they do this? How did they do that? And just reaching out to that small network that you do have with people with the same disability. See if anyone has a cousin of a friend of a mother of a daughter who's gone abroad, who's done this. That's what I had to do. I had to find my own way. And I also reached out to my doctor too. I have like every 3 months with my doctor and just like, is this possible? Like, can I do this? I was already going to go anyways. I just wanted to make sure. But yeah, she gave me a list of everything that I need to look for and what to expect. And she said, if there's ever a problem, call me, like with her personal cell phone number. So if you have people in your corner that will back you up, definitely reach out to those sources. Applying at large. So I did apply through my university the first time, and that was a whole mess. And then I applied again, second time at large. I definitely would reach out to your university that you graduated from and saying like, hey, like I'm a recent graduate. This is where I want to go. Is there any sources you can help? And then your university will help, alumni to get to where you want to go. So definitely reach out to those alumni networks.
I'll jump in real quick. I talk too much. But I did not get any support for my Fulbright, even though I did do it through the university. But in terms of disabilities, I had no interaction with the Disability Center at U of A throughout my entire 4 years for my master's. What I would say is believe in us, really believe in us. It meant the absolute world to have an advisor, not blink twice, not freak out. I've had many people freak out when they see my qualifications and what I've done, and then they see autism and it's all out the window. Something that, all of us here, we had no say in this. We make the best that we can. I am determined to lead a fulfilling life. But the challenges and the experiences, like, I think that's the piece, is that knowing that it's possible, knowing that's capable, and it may look different, and just not being afraid to try different programs. Like for me, it turned out an unstructured program was a really good fit, because then I could at least make sure that I'm in bed by 7 o'clock so I don't have meltdowns. And like, have the chance to coordinate my own trips and reduce those triggers and those things, just to be aware and have confidence in your students. So.
If I can also step in to maybe like right beside Katie's comment, listen, like that would be the hands down, like I would remember you for the rest of my life for that. You would be utterly surprised how often you go to people with problems, and me and my friend, we have this thing of, do you want a solution now, or do you just need someone to listen to you? And I think taking that moment to just say, hey, what is it that you need, so you can figure out exactly what the thing is that that student needs. It's that attention to detail, and it's that individual kind of motion and that personal bit that really went a long way. And again, why I remember Karima, and we're Facebook friends, and we every once in a while I'll be like, her son's super cute, I've seen him grow up. So that's been, but I think that is what it takes outside of the more institutional things, from just purely from being a mentor and being there for the students and a guide, I would say is just as important for someone like me who, yeah, I just may be okay and then I may not be. So sometimes I just need that support.
And just one last bit is that we set the tone. Like it or not, the United States has one of the most robust exchange programs in the country. So the more people with diabetes, the more people with autism, the more people with bipolar disorder, health concerns that go abroad, that also is going to set up and set a precedent that we're not scary, that we're not liability risks for the other people in those countries that have that care, and maybe encourage countries to start providing that care to their citizens. So.
Well, that's a great, Katey, you like must be, I don't know, reading my mind or someone else's mind here. So I was going to say, there's a question in the chat I definitely would love for all three of you to try to answer, in addition to another question that I think we talked about as a group. We have about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to spend maybe the last 30 seconds just bringing about the survey that the We Represent team has asked all moderators to just make sure to introduce before I let you all go. But one of the questions in the chat was, how much did you reveal about your disability in your application for your programs? I know they claim that they want disabled participants, but I'm just concerned about how much the admissions team's biases, in parentheses, about what disabled people can do, might work against me. And so that's a question, and I think I'm going to follow up with something we talked about in terms of what is also just advice that you could supplement to that for students that are applying. Because I know initially we gave advice to advisors, but what are some advice pieces you can give to students as well as they think about this?
That's a really personal decision that you're going to have to make for yourself. Like it really and truly is. Because it's different points in my life, it's changed. While I was at university, or let me put it this way. At the current moment, I do not, on job applications, on fellowship applications, I do not mention that I have a mental illness. I just don't do it because I have experienced discrimination and it's not fun. However, what I will do is in the interview process, in all of it, I will talk about my symptoms and how that has helped me, right? And so, and I'll maybe put it in more generalized terms. But again, that's up to you. I feel like I'm much more comfortable talking about different traumatic experiences than I am about this one, but I also haven't been living with it my whole life. So your experience could be different.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a different experience because I always was outed. Like I was one of the first in my city to have autism as a woman. And I've gone through bits and pieces in my life, but I feel a lot better for me personally, and this is only me, saying that I'm prone to meltdown, saying that I won't make eye contact before people start thinking I'm suspicious and before there's something. So again, I don't usually say things until I'm first get to know people when I'm abroad, if it's relevant. But the exchange programs, yes, if I have to be evacuated, you need to know this information. And I think that's the piece. That being said, I mean, we can't hide this stuff. Like if there's an emergency, we're going to have to be able to say this stuff. And I think it's all depends on the situation and the circumstance. So for Fulbright, I did put it in my personal statement. I do put it in my fellowship applications because why do I care about health equity? I experience health disparities. And I don't think, and I want to be people to know that if you really want to be inclusive, hey, I'm going to put all my cards on the table. And that's just where I am at life. I'm tired of hiding things. I'm I'm in my late 20s. I'm tired. I ain't got time for this. But that's just the place where I'm at. It is bad for me to say, but Namibia was asking to get the visa to like declare all your mental health issues and your disabilities. And I was this close to closing the application saying, I'm not doing this. They're going to find out about autism and freak out. And so I shouldn't say this, but we're being 100% honest. But my personal doctor, she basically was like, I'm not going to even say that you're autistic or that you have anxiety on this application. Like, let's just get you the visa. Like Fulbright knows that's what matters. Let's not add to their stigma. So lying probably is not the best approach, but no, your visa country does not need to know every little tiny detail about your experience. Yes, I yield to Sophia.
Sorry, I'm trying to type a message in the chat on the Q&A before time runs out. I also, as Jasmine and Kay said, I didn't really bring it up in my application. It wasn't something until I got there. I've always sadly have been ashamed about my diabetes because I always felt out of place, and especially because you can see it hanging in my pockets, and people always see the wire, my tubing. I don't know. It wasn't until recently where I felt more comfortable sharing my experience. So I'm not sure, like Jasmine said, it is a personal choice. I chose not to. But once I did get there, it was very common, and I was able to share it with my Fulbright advisor and Bourne advisor. So that's up to you to decide. And then Alexandra, I'm going to answer your question real quick. It wasn't difficult, but it did happen frequently where I had to continually explain that I couldn't eat certain things. But my host family was more than happy to like find a place that accommodated my needs. So it wasn't difficult. It just happened a lot where I was like, no, I can't eat that. I can't eat this. But yeah. Sorry, I was trying to type it at the same time, but I got confused.
That's okay. I was really impressed because I was watching you type and answer at the same time. So I know we are at time. I'm going to send the survey as the We Represent team has asked all moderators for all sessions to be sending out. These act as just feedback in terms of how you enjoyed the session, and also act as raffle entries for some great prizes. So I just want to thank Sophia, Jasmine, Katey. You've been so wonderful. Thank you for being such lovely panelists. And I took a few notes, and I just want to say really quickly that, some key quotes I heard from, this group was, having a disability does not need to be a limiting story. There are going to be people around you to help, if you decide to pursue these programs. And that, in terms of fighting and advocating for yourself, that's very, very important. So I just want to thank our attendees, also for being here with us and listening to, again, our lovely panelists and their stories and experiences. So I'm just going to put the survey link in, or I think someone else is. Here you go. Thank you so much all. And we look forward to seeing you at other sessions.
Yeah, please reach out over LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Just tell us who you are before you message us. I'm protective of my LinkedIn.
That is a solid point.
Don't
Yes,
just add me,
please
just say
introduce
who you
yourself.
are, what your needs are. We'll find time to talk. I guess we should leave the room. All right. Pleasure, y'all. Thank you so much. Please keep in touch.